Welcome to Inside Israel, everyone. This is episode 87 called War with Iran, week two. And it is the week of June 25th, 2025. And obviously, this is one of those very big news weeks with a lot to talk about. And I'll explain in a minute how exactly I'm going to go through it and try to make sense of everything happening in Israel right now. First, I do want to say welcome to a lot of first timers. I know that we have a lot of people who signed up for the podcast, for the live recording for the first time. And I just want to tell you what this is all about and what my mission statement is. And it really relates to what I'm doing today. I've assumed by now that you've heard all the big news about what's going on here in the Middle East. And my job, as I see it, is not to just spit that back to you or repeat what you can really see or hear everyone else in terms of the big headlines. What I want to do, and what's the mission of this podcast in general, is to try to make sense of what Israelis actually feel about it. What are we saying? What are we experiencing emotionally? Where is our psyche? A lot of the times, the big stories on our minds are very different from what's being covered in not just media around the world, but even in Israeli media. I know I have a lot of Israelis who tune into this as well because they want more of a personal take on what's happening. So for all you first timers who are joining us today, that's really what we're all about, and I hope I deliver it to you. And of course, I'm open to your feedback and love to hear from you. I'll put that in the chat at the end, but you can always reach me through my website, which is joelchasnoff.com, with comments, feedback, and questions. I also want to bring up the episode I did 2 weeks ago about real estate here in Israel. That episode was called Thanks and FU. I got a lot of response from listeners about that episode, and I'm going to get to it maybe next week or maybe next month. Right now, everything happening with Iran, I think, is taking precedent over that. But rest assured, I will get back to that episode and continue with it because I think that's a very good insight into what's happening in Israel right now. And even all the more so, right now, as I'm going to mention, we have more than 10,000 families in Israel who've been displaced from their homes because of missiles, bombs that have fallen either directly on their apartment buildings and houses or nearby. And so that even adds to the housing crisis that we have in Israel right now. So that episode is one that we are going to get to. Today, however, it goes without saying that we need to talk about I don't know, would you say it's thoroughly unexpected or completely expected attack on Fordo last night by American forces, Fordo being the main nuclear hub of Iran. And again, what I want to do is tell you what Israelis are saying about it. What are we hearing in our own media? What are Israelis on the street talking about? And what I did for today's episode is I constructed 10 bullet points that I'm going to briefly touch on that I think will sort of take us behind the news story and really show you where Israelis are right now. And my hope is that by the end of this list, you'll sort of get an idea of our psychology and what we're going through. Because like I said, it is very different from what you may be seeing in the media, in your own countries, or anywhere else. So number one, what are Israelis saying about the attack on Fordo that happened at about hour 2:30, 3 a.m. here in Israel? I woke up this morning at about 7:30 to an air raid siren, and this is typical. We've been since this, in the last, well, since the war began, there's only been one night that I got a complete night's sleep without an air raid siren. Last night was one of those nights, but I was woken up a little bit early at 7:30 from this morning's air raid siren. And while I was down in the bomb shelter, and I should say it's a new and improved bomb shelter, we had a Wi-Fi router put in about 4 days ago, so now we have access to our smartphones down in the shelter. And as we were down there at 7:30 in the morning sheltering for this new wave of attacks, it came up on our news feeds that, lo and behold, the U.S. did bomb Fordo in the middle of the night while we were sleeping and didn't know about it. So what are Israelis saying? I would say across the board, euphoric. I have not heard one voice of dissension. I haven't heard anyone from any side of the political spectrum, religious spectrum, anyone who's said that this is a bad idea. Israelis have wanted this for a long time. We didn't want to admit it, but in our hearts, we all secretly felt that this mission against Iran could not be complete without the U.S. getting involved for the simple fact that only America has these Moabs, mother of all bombs, the bunker busters that can penetrate the 60 meters below the earth. That's roughly, I guess, about 60 yards, 125 feet below the earth. And so we were really hoping this would happen. And there are signs around Tel Aviv today that say, "Thank you, Mr. President," with Trump's picture on there and an American flag. Across the board, Israelis are euphoric that this happened. So that's what Israelis are saying about the actual event itself. Number two, is this Bibi's redemption? Bibi being Benjamin Netanyahu, our prime minister. You know, Netanyahu is the only Israeli official who has not taken any responsibility for October 7th. The head of our intelligence took responsibility, the chief of staff, head of the Mossad, minister of defense. They all admitted that they had made a mistake and were somewhat responsible for October 7th happening. We've been waiting for Netanyahu to make such an admission. He never has. And as I've said many times before on this podcast, 70% of Israelis have wanted Netanyahu to step down. They wanted new elections. They wanted the chance to at least elect a new Knesset with a new prime minister. That said, all of that does seem to be pushed aside for the moment. The country really is rallying just behind this entire operation against Iran. No one is really calling Bibi a hero, but we are saying a few things. First of all, I think we all know that there really is no other prime minister who would have had the cojones to pull this off. By no stretch of the imagination do we think that someone from the center and left would have done it. Lapid or Gantz or anyone else. Yair Golan, definitely not. And even Naftali Bennett, who we have seen as the one person who could defeat Netanyahu in an election, many people, myself included, believe that even he would not have had the balls at the end of the day to strike Iran militarily. What you need to understand is that this has been Bibi's life project. No matter what else Bibi has cared about in his lifetime, the number one thing he has cared about is destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities and the threat of Iran against Israel. And I think a lot of resources and money and manpower were put into that, probably diverting some that should have gone to monitoring Hamas in Gaza. But at the end of the day, right now, I don't know if we could say that this is Bibi's redemption, because eventually he will have to answer for October 7th. And there are still many questions that need to be answered, like the fact that the ultra-Orthodox still are not being drafted into the military. We've discovered over the past week that we don't have nearly enough shelters in the country to protect people from incoming missiles from Iran or elsewhere. And so questions are being asked, why are billions of shekels going to the ultra-Orthodox population to study in yeshiva and not being put into building shelters throughout the country? So these questions are still going to exist. But for the moment, the country really is rallying behind the mission, and that does mean rallying behind Netanyahu. So I do not think this absolves Netanyahu of any responsibility for October 7th, but for the time being, no one is really criticizing him all that much. There are some outliers who are bringing up those points that I just mentioned, but even in the media, you are not hearing criticism of Netanyahu, and I think there are some fair criticisms that could be directed at him right now. Like I said, we don't have enough shelters throughout the country, that the Arab community is vastly short on shelters compared to the Jewish population of Israel. But even in Tel Aviv, 30% of apartment buildings and homes don't have a shelter in their apartment or even in their basement. So they need to go to parking garages and or public shelters nearby. So there are questions that he needs to be held accountable for, but even in the media, you're not seeing that right now. So by and large, Bibi is getting a pass. I wouldn't say he's necessarily a hero. Most people see Trump as the real hero and the Israeli Air Force as the real hero and the Mossad, but there is not criticism of Bibi happening right now. Question three, bullet point three. Does the world know that we're doing them a favor? This is a question that Israelis are asking. Doesn't the world know that we're doing them a favor? Because we're still a bit appalled that there are Americans who are protesting this or who are against it, and that the world doesn't seem to be completely on board supporting Israel. We don't get it because in our minds, what we have done for the past week, 2 weeks, clearing the path for the U.S. to be able to bomb at Fordo, that was the work of Israel doing a favor for the rest of the world. And we're sort of baffled that we're not seeing more world support. So no, I don't think the world realizes how much of a favor we're doing them. Even the United Nations is criticizing Israel for and the U.S. for these attacks in Iran. But it does reiterate our feeling that it really, at the end of the day, comes down to people who are going to be anti-Israel no matter what and anti-Semitic no matter what, which is why I believe that we need to drop this notion that enough facts are going to convince the world that Israel is in the right. It just doesn't seem, to me, that's inane and asinine. That's clearly not the case. It's not about convincing anyone. Those who are against Israel are going to be against Israel no matter what. Okay. Bullet point number 4, Iran's retaliation. So like I said this morning, we had a large barrage of rockets fired at us. I believe it was 35 in the end, which was much bigger than we saw over the past few days. They are targeting hospitals. They are targeting civilian populations. Again, Israelis are asking, where's the outcry? where's the United Nations condemning Iran for targeting civilian populations? You don't see any of that the way we should, not that we'd expect it. Iran does seem to have a couple of new strategies, which Israelis are aware of. Number one is that instead of firing 20 or 25 missiles at one civilian population center, what they're doing instead is sending 5 missiles to 5 different population centers. So that way, they're sending 5 to Tel Aviv and 5 to Haifa, 5 to Beersheba, 5 to the desert. We had a few fall in the Shomron. Why are they going for these areas, and why are they using this strategy? Number one, every area has a certain goal. For Tel Aviv, it's the population center of the country. The majority of Israelis live in the plurality of the biggest population center is Tel Aviv. Haifa is where our gas production is. The south is where our nuclear reactor is. So they have goals in terms of firing at these certain areas. And their hope is that by spreading out the firing, they'll be able to overwhelm the Iron Dome system, the David Shield system, and all the anti-missile systems that we have. Another new strategy that Iran has been using, which Israelis are aware of, is that they're using missiles with special warheads that when they reach their peak and begin their descent, the warhead splits into about 6 different smaller warheads, sort of sprinkling down 6 mini warheads. And this is much harder for Iron Dome to shoot down. They cause less damage when they actually fall because obviously they weigh a lot less. But because it's difficult to shoot them down, they are able to destroy homes and cars and population centers and injure people, which leads to the next point I want to make is about the Home Front Command. Last week in the broadcast, I told you about Pikud HaOref, the Home Front Command, and I'm afraid I made it seem like anyone who was injured or, God forbid, killed, that it was on them. That really all they had to do was go into the shelter, either in their house or apartment or in the basement of their apartment building. And if they didn't, they're to blame for for suffering the consequences. And I've since learned that that really isn't the case. Number one, We did have a family this week that was killed. They were in their bomb shelter inside their apartment. However, they lightning struck in a way, and this missile directly hit their, it's called Ma'amad, their safe room in their apartment, and it was not able to withstand the blast of that direct hit. That is a sort of a one, I wouldn't even say one in a million. I'd say 1 in 10 million scenario where you would suffer a direct hit specifically on the safe room in your apartment. Otherwise, that safe room will protect you 100%. But in this case, it suffered a direct hit, and the couple inside was killed. But what we've also realized is, like I said before, there are many, many homes and apartment buildings that do not have any sort of shelter at all. And that was my mistake last week. I didn't realize it. But like I said, in Tel Aviv, about 30% of the apartment buildings and homes don't have any sort of safe room, which is a room in your own apartment or house that is meant to withstand a missile blast or the shock waves, or a shelter in the basement. We live in an older building in Ra'anana, and so we have a basement downstairs that I've been there probably about 15, 20 times over the past 2 weeks. That's where we go. But it turns out that 30% in general, about 30% of the homes and apartments in the country don't have either of those, which means, and in Arab population centers, it's even higher, which means people need to go to a public school nearby or a community center or find one of these small bunkers just out on the street, which is not so easy to do. Generally, you only have 10 minutes warning ahead of time. And if you think about families with elderly people, a lot of the people who've been killed since this war began here in Israel have been elderly who simply weren't able to get to a shelter outside of their apartment building. So I'm sorry if I made it seem like we have access to shelters and all you've got to do is just not be lazy and go. It really is the case that there's a lot of effort required for about a third of the population of Israel to get to a shelter. That said, what we have found is that if people were properly inside their shelters, they were not injured or killed, except for this one couple that suffered a direct hit. So the shelters really are working. But one thing we're learning is that we need more of them, and there has not been nearly enough money allocated to building them throughout the country. And like I said, this is raising all these questions. Why are we putting so much money into refurbishing apartments against this earthquake that we're expecting in the next 10 to 100 years when we have this immediate threat with Iran? Why is so much money going to the ultra-Orthodox population and to the West Bank settlements, illegal communities, and not to build shelters within Israel proper? So these are all questions that eventually will have to be answered. Number 7, the Israelis abroad. I think I mentioned last week that there were 25 to 30,000 Israelis abroad. It turns out that number is actually about 100,000 Israelis who've been trapped abroad. This includes people that I know personally. And here's another example of, Bibi and the messenger is the message. His transportation minister, Miri Regev, is widely looked down upon as someone who just doesn't say the right thing. She has no tact. And her first announcement this past week to all the Israelis overseas was, to all the Israelis, Bechul, chul means chutz la'aretz, overseas. She said to all the Israelis overseas, hey, you're overseas, you're on vacation, enjoy yourselves. That was her first statement to all the Israelis who were trapped overseas. Now, this includes parents who left their kids with friends or grandparents to go on vacation and who now can't get back to their kids. It includes people with medications, and they had enough medication for their 1 week trip, but not enough to continue as they're trapped overseas. And her comments just seemed really insensitive, and she's been trying to walk those back the entire week. Right now, where do we stand? El Al and Arkia and Israel, the 3 Israeli airlines, have been canceling their flights for Israelis here, and instead airlifting Israelis back from these destinations. I don't think we're anywhere near completely done yet, but right now that is the plan. The plan is to repatriate and get all the Israelis who are trapped overseas back. But we still have quite a few thousand who have not made it back yet. And yesterday, on that note, the Mossad and the Shabak thwarted an attack. There was a terrorist attack being planned against Israelis in Cyprus. Right now, what we're seeing is a lot of Israelis in these foreign airports, Greece, Cyprus, etc., without a lot of extra security. And so, whenever you have a lot of Israelis in the same place at the same time, it raises the security risk. And yesterday, an attack was thwarted ahead of time because the Mossad knew about it or was able to find out about it. But this is something that not just Israelis, but Jews around the world now have to really be aware of. And frankly, maybe even just Americans around the world, not just Jews. Um, so that's where we stand with Israelis overseas. The addiction to the news. You got to be, if you want to know what's going on in Israel, you have to be aware of this. It is so hard to get through our days because we are addicted to the news. We know that we're watching one of the biggest events in Israel's history unfold in front of our very eyes. The longer I watch the news, the more I realize that very little new information is coming out. It's more the same information just being presented either over and over verbatim or in slightly different ways. And yet it's still very hard to turn away. You always feel like you're on the cusp of the next big story. You're always feeling like the next big revelation is about to be presented. And so it's very hard to turn off the news right now. And as long as we're talking about the news, we should talk about the commercials during the news. I would say about half the commercials during the news right now are from banks telling us that they've got our backs, that they're by our side during these hard times, that they should just go to Bank Leumi or Bank Mizrahi or Bank Discount or whatever bank and apply for a loan with special terms to help us through this difficult time. And meanwhile, if you've been following the news here in Israel, you've seen that along with El Al, the other big sector that's made a ton of money since October 7th is the banking industry in Israel. They are raking in the cash from all the loans that they are making with interest to the Israeli population. So you should not get the idea that El Al and the banks are on our side and doing it for us. Their advertising will try to make it seem that way, but I assure you, they are making huge profits off of Israelis since October 7th. And you can look this up. This isn't just my opinion. The numbers and stats. Go online right now. Try to buy a ticket on El Al. You'll see it's much more expensive than it's ever been. Number nine, the disruption of daily life here in Israel. Um, when thinking about a terrorist attack or an enemy like Iran, and you're looking for comparisons, the natural place to look is September 11th, saying, "Oh, this is Israel's version of September 11th," but it's not. Right? What's happening in Israel right now, I don't want you to think of September 11th as a comparison. I want you to think of COVID-19, coronavirus. That's what Israelis are going through. There's a sense of lockdown. I took my kid to the park today, and the park was literally bolted shut. The gate was, you couldn't go into the skate park. Gyms are closed, so you can't work out. The tennis center is closed. All but essential stores are closed. So yes, grocery stores and pharmacies are open, but all other businesses are closed and schools are closed. Our closest friends here in Israel, their daughter's bat mitzvah celebration was tonight. That's obviously been canceled. So what you're seeing right now is a country on lockdown, and it's really been that way since the war began. The restrictions were eased a bit as Israel made progress in the war, but then with the American attack on Fordo last night, all the restrictions were put in place again. So here we are. This week was the official first day of summer, and all the pools are closed and the beaches are closed, and all the summer things you would do are closed, and you're kind of trapped in your house. And you, if you can remember during Corona and COVID, what that did to the psychology of children and what it did to the psychology of adults. I can tell you just anecdotally that our family's been bickering more than usual. Uh, I've been in cranky and in a kind of a rotten mood for these past 2 weeks, and it's not just me. Like everyone I'm talking to is saying that, and that brings up my last bullet point, which is sort of, I want to call it Joel's world, but also the mood of the country in general. There's everyone I talk to agrees with me, and I feel this. There's something different about this war with Iran. Emotionally, there's something different. I personally am feeling a sense of physical exhaustion that I haven't felt in a long time. And a lot of that has to do simply with physiologically being denied sleep. Like I said, there's only been 2 nights since the war began that we got a complete night's sleep. And even when you get a complete night's sleep, your ears are kind of waiting for the air raid siren, for the alert on your phone. So you're not sleeping deeply. You're not getting the REM, the deep sleep that you really need to replenish. So just on that physical level, I've been exhausted and cranky and quick to snap at people. I felt a little bit of depression over these past over since the war began. I think part of it is the fatigue, but also part of it I think is seeing Israel attacked from the outside, seeing missiles fly into Israeli airspace and destroy Israeli homes and apartment buildings, and seeing our fellow Israelis trapped in the rubble here on Israeli soil. I think it's bringing up those questions again of like, are we even safe in our own country? Questions that began arising, on October 7th. But mixed with all of that is the euphoria of the fact that our Air Force has had such success decimating Iran's ability to fight back and really humiliating Iran to the rest of the Arab world and to the world in general. And the attack last night on Fordo led to an even bigger burst of euphoria. And what it's caused is this real roller coaster of emotions where on the one hand we are trapped at home and depressed and we're not sleeping and so we're cranky and anxious, but at the same time we do feel this element of euphoria that we seem to be winning and that America has our back, and that is we as a country might be safe again. We also know that there's a long road ahead of us. Like I mentioned, 10,000 Israelis are without homes right now, and that number they expect is going to grow. Why is it going to grow? Two reasons. Number one, there are Israelis abroad who haven't come back yet to realize their homes are uninhabitable. And number two, there are entire apartment buildings that now need to be knocked down because of structural damage. So even if certain buildings, only let's say only 5% of the buildings in a high rise were damaged, the entire building needs to be knocked down because of structural damage overall. And while all this is happening, we still have hostages in Gaza. We just had 3 bodies of slain hostages be brought back to Israel today, but we're aware that there are about 20, hopefully more, living hostages still in Gaza. I wouldn't say that they have been forgotten, but we are not talking about them the way we used to. If anything, during the newscast, they'll have a segment saying, and let's not forget that there are still hostages, and they'll interview the family member of a hostage. But then they'll quickly cut back to the story about how there's shortages at supermarkets or what families are doing to keep their kids entertained, and sort of these more fluffy pieces. And the hostages are not getting the attention that they used to. I mean, we're already 620 plus days in at this point, and so every day I think it decreases a little bit. I personally think that this can help bring the hostages home. Iran is the head of the snake, and once we have them under control and their neck under our boot, so to speak, I think that will give us more leverage over what happens with the hostages and Hamas. But for the time being, emotionally we are trying to balance all of this, and it's been a very, very emotionally challenging past 2 weeks. And everyone I've talked to has said this, that there just feels like there's something different this time. There's an anxiety and an exhaustion. And I think it's also bringing up a lot of existential questions, like how much does my work matter in a world where there are nuclear bombs and where fellow Israelis are losing their homes completely and are sleeping in hotels yet again. You know what? how much do our lives, our work, our goals matter in the context of this bigger story? So it's raising some existential questions as well. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and then I'll be back with listener questions. So once again, I'm Joel Chasnoff coming to you from Ra'anana outside of Tel Aviv, episode 87 of Inside Israel. And now some of the questions that you wrote in. I will say most questions were answered. I got a lot of questions this week in the past 24 hours. A lot of them were answered in what I talked about so far, but a few I haven't. And so I'm going to try to address those. Number one, this one comes from Marie Claire. She asked, are we allowing Iran's theocracy to survive? Can Israel help those seeking regime change in Iran? Israel had four goals at the beginning of this war. Regime change was not one of the goals. However, more and more in Israel, we're talking about trying to incite regime change. Netanyahu has been calling on the people of Iran to take to the streets and revolt against the regime. I think it would certainly be not just in Israel's interest, but in the world's interest to have a new leadership in Iran. That said, every expert I've seen on television here in Israel during these newscasts, which I'm watching way too much of, they've all said the same thing, that at the end of the day, you cannot force regime change, that the Iranians would need to do this on their own when they're ready. And that frankly, at the moment, there really isn't an opposition in place. So although it's something we're hoping for, Marie Claire, it's not something that we are actively orchestrating. This is from Eric. Are Israelis considering activating alternate citizenships to potentially leave the country? So I suppose what Eric is talking about are Israelis who have dual citizenship, maybe they have citizenship elsewhere. Are Israelis trying to take advantage of their dual citizenship and leave the country? Not that I've heard of. If anything, Israelis are trying to get back to Israel. I've mentioned the 100,000 plus who are stuck outside of Israel and trying to get home. And if anything, I would see this as more of a reason to want to stay in Israel. It seems like one of our biggest threats, one of our biggest problems, at least externally, is on the way to being solved. Now, at the same time, I've always felt that Israel's biggest obstacle is the internal challenges we face, the Haredim, the religious versus non-religious, the right versus left, and the polarization within Israeli society. But from what I'm here, I am not hearing stories about Israelis looking to leave the country. And just anecdotally, the people I speak to, no one is talking about leaving right now. I'm only one guy. My bubble is small. I don't speak for everyone, but that's my take on it. Our third question is from Donna. She actually had two questions. Number one, Netanyahu is, well, we should let you know the war here is called Rising Lion in English. So Netanyahu's Rising Lion war name, is this a rallying cry? Is this for the history books? How will other countries view it? And what's your take? Look, Netanyahu does have an element of wanting to be remembered and wanting to go down in history as something. He spent a lot of time trying to think of the name for the war that followed October 7th, whether it be the Simchat Torah War, I think that's what he wanted, or something else. I don't remember what the other options were. At the end of the day, most Israelis just refer to it as Hamilchama Shvi'i October, like the War of October 7th. It doesn't have a special name. But I imagine Rising Lion, yeah. I mean, Netanyahu's always been into having cool, memorable names for his operations. He's certainly someone who wants to go down and be remembered in history. Is it a rallying cry? Yeah, in a way it is. You do hear him invoking that name in his speeches and trying to, I think, rally Israelis behind him. How do other countries view it? I don't know that other countries are paying attention all that much. maybe you, the listeners to this hour, because you're really the inside group and want to know what Israelis are up to. I doubt that most around the world know even about the name of the war. And then she asked one more question. Did my friend who bought a home in Israel listen to the podcast episode 2 weeks ago where I called him out for doing that? I haven't heard from him since then. And like I said, I'm going to get to the responses, your responses to that episode very soon. I heard from a lot of you and some really interesting responses. But no, so far I have not heard from my friend who bought the apartment here. And I kind of hope not to. I was kind of hard on him, although I was honest and I stand by everything I said. Thank you for joining us for this week's really special episode of Inside Israel, the live broadcast. Next week's live broadcast will take place on Sunday. That'll be the 29th of June at 1 p.m. Eastern, our usual time. To get the link to that, if you don't already have it, sign up for my newsletter at joelchasnoff.com/podcast. And that's also where you can send me a question or feedback or just say hi, which I'm always happy for you to do. There is a chance, if there is huge news this week, that I'll end up doing another live broadcast before next Sunday. If you're on my newsletter mailing list, you will find out about that. Otherwise, the next time I'll be speaking to most of you is on Thursday in this week's newsletter, Hebrew is Magic, with another Hebrew word specially picked out for the times we are living in, and then we will talk next Sunday as well. If you know someone else who you think would benefit or enjoy these Inside Israel broadcasts, please send them the link, the newsletter information. Tomorrow, within 24 hours of right now, you will be able to see the video of this broadcast on my website. Again, that's joelchasnoff.com/podcast. I will leave the chat open for a few more minutes. Otherwise, here's to a quiet night for all of us, wherever we are, but especially here in Israel, looking for a full night's sleep. Laila Tov, everyone. Thanks for joining.